Welcome here on site, online. Welcome to today's NIAS talk where at Spij 25, where we'll talk about female entrepreneurship in the past and in the present. My name is Sarah Kars. I am program maker at NIAS, the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study, and I will be your moderator tonight. So tonight we'll talk about female entrepreneurship, from housewife to CEO, from past to present. And maybe it's me, but I have not always considered entrepreneurship something to be practiced by women. I always saw it as something practiced by men. And I think that's not entirely correct, but we'll find out tonight. And I guess more and more women globally are working as CEOs or starting their own business as a self-employed innovator. And I'm wondering, is this a sign of changing ideas and roles of women? And tonight we'll explore more of this, and we'll do so from different perspectives with three amazing speakers. And we'll consider with these speakers, Celine Dilly, Kirsten van den Heul and Josephine Keuter, whether there are any commonalities over time. And we will also really consider this idea of female entrepreneurship and the gendered aspect of entrepreneurship. I think before giving Celine the stage, I'll tell you a little bit more about our speakers. From there on, Celine will do a short presentation. Kirsten and I will join her on stage and respond quickly, and Josephine will read a short column tonight. So before we start, Celine is assistant professor of economic and social history at Utrecht University, and from February 2022 she will be a NIAS fellow, where she will work on a case study on the evolution of Dutch female entrepreneurship in the 20th century. Kirsten van den Heul is a former member of parliament for the Dutch Labour Party, where she was responsible for, amongst others, education, gender equality and much more. She was part of the, I don't know if I say it correctly, preparation group, voorbereidingsgroep, that focused on female entrepreneurship. And prior to her political career of the last 4 years, she founded the Change Agent, which is a consulting firm. And I don't think we should forget that in 2011 she was appointed UN Women's Representative. Then, last but not least, Josephine Keuter studied English and Cultural Analysis at the University of Amsterdam and Leiden University, and she's fascinated by contemporary pop culture. So she wrote her master thesis on how reality series like Keeping Up with the Kardashians or The Real Housewives play with notions of capitalism, feminism. And for tonight's talk she wrote a column on these women in these series and how they play with entrepreneurship. Celine, can I give you the stage?
Welcome everyone, also those behind their screens. I am not sure even where the camera is. Yes, now this is better. Yes. So thank you also for the introduction, Zara, and giving me the opportunity to talk about my research. This is an ongoing research and it will also take place in NIAS from 2022 onwards, but I thought for the topic of tonight it would be nice to set the scene by providing what the situation in Europe today and how it changed over time. So I will be taking you over the different contexts across Europe as well as over time. But before we get started, what I want to do is actually talk about why you are here today and why you should be listening to me in the next 15 minutes, though it might not be the right audience because you are here and it seems you are interested on the topic, but it's always good to start with the motivation why you should be listening to me. So here I will present you 3 arguments why female entrepreneurship is actually important. So in the first place, giving from the business and diversity therein, actually if you look at the situation in Europe, 1 out of 3 businesses are female-owned businesses. And out of this 1 out of 3 female-owned businesses, they tend to be less innovative, they engage in less innovative sectors as well, so there's sectoral segregation. They employ fewer women, and they are also more vulnerable to exogenous shocks such as economic crisis. So if you look at even the case of Netherlands alone, since the pandemic started, according to the statistics of the Dutch Statistical Agency, 4,000 businesses of female-owned businesses disappeared simply, whereas the number of female-owned businesses continued to increase. So that would be one thing to consider what's going on there. The second one would actually concern the benefits female entrepreneurship can have in realizing the Sustainable Development Goals, and that would be one of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not sure if you are familiar with it. These are set by United Nations, and gender equality, the 5th one. And the idea is if you have more female entrepreneurs, it actually would show that female-owned businesses tend to hire 2.5 times more female employees as well. So having female entrepreneurs means also that you have more women participating in the labor force. A third argument would concern that it's also smart economics. So it's not only about addressing gender equality, but actually female entrepreneurship remains an untapped source for innovation and economic growth. And here actually I took something from the World Economic Forum. And according to World Economic Forum, which I think I will take a pause actually. Is it okay that I do this? Because I feel like I'm not heard very well. Or is it okay? Yeah, is it okay? Okay. That is me, okay. So according to World Economic Forum, for instance, if you talk about climate change as well, actually female entrepreneurs will be the solution for this because they are engaging in much more social entrepreneurship type, so related to the social issues and societal challenges we are facing. So if I convinced you why you should be listening to me in the next 10 minutes, this will be the structure of my talk. So I will actually start my talk with who are the entrepreneurs that we are talking about. Then I will share some recent trends across Europe, so what is the situation is, and what type of entrepreneurship women engage in. Then I will walk you through why we need a historical perspective on the issue, and there I will focus on 2 things. The first one would concern what type of change we see in female entrepreneurship, so has it been very stable over time, has it changed in a linear fashion, or do we see reversals actually? And the second one would concern what are the explanations behind this. So why is it the case that historically female entrepreneurs were active in the past, why it got less over time, and can we learn something from today? Can we draw lessons from the past for the situation of female entrepreneurs today? And then some conclusions, and I heard that it's better to leave the questions to the panel discussion. So I would like to open the question to you actually, who the entrepreneurs are. When I say an entrepreneur, what comes to your mind? So is it the people in picture A? So I think many of the people would be familiar with Mark Zuckerberg, who is the founder of Facebook on the top. Maybe the woman in the bottom is less familiar. Is there Coco Chanel? Yeah. Yes, definitely. Exactly. So are these the people under picture A are the entrepreneurs that comes to your mind? Or is it the, the small shop owners, restaurant owners, the hairdressers that you come to? So can I see hands in the audience when I say entrepreneur, who thinks of the picture A people? Okay. And who thinks of picture B people? No. It's relatively fairly equally distributed with some preference for picture A people. And while in this audience we have a bit of a divided idea, if you look at the entrepreneurship literature as well as the policy briefs from the European Commission or the, more the governmental level, our focus has been much more on the A type of people. And we would call them the silicon type of entrepreneurs. So these are the people who generate billions of euros. They are the ones who innovate, and they actually change our daily life. So Coco Chanel introduced pants to women, for instance, or Facebook, we are active every night. So our policy tools are very much directed to this type of people, whereas we usually overlook at what's happening and how to support the B type of picture people. And the problem is the A type entrepreneurs actually make up only 1% of the entrepreneurs, so they are the unicorns. So we are trying to go for the unicorns while we are actually forgetting the everyday entrepreneurship. So today I will be discussing the B type of entrepreneurs and how it changed over time. And I think our starting point should be about if we want to understand the women's engagement in entrepreneurship, but also men's entrepreneurship on everyday life, we should have more inclusive definitions of entrepreneurship. And for this, I will actually focus on an entrepreneurship definition not by me, but by Eric Stamm. And he would define entrepreneurship as the ability of women and men, both independently and within organizations, to create and introduce new ideas under uncertainty. If you were to take this definition, actually, both picture A type as well as B type would be entrepreneurs, as well as the innovators. And even I would take it as far as taking Angela Merkel as entrepreneur, institutional entrepreneur, but that will not be the focus of my talk, otherwise I will not be able to finish tonight. So let's discuss the situation today. Let me share you what the situation of female entrepreneurship is today. So for that, I took just one measure. So female self-employment is one of the direct ways of looking at entrepreneurship. So if you were to look at this picture, you will see that the share of female self-employed is much higher in the Southern European context. Italy is especially doing well. Eastern European countries are doing well. Whereas if you look at cases like Germany or Scandinavian countries who are famous for gender equality, they have very few self-employed, and I will discuss in a minute with the explanations at the end of my talk why this is the case. Whereas Netherlands, for instance, is a mediocre case, for instance. This actually tells something about the supply of entrepreneurs. One way of looking at it, and it involves both who are self-employed, so they don't hire anyone else, but it also includes women who are actually hiring other people, engaging in innovative sectors as well. So it's a very aggregate way of looking at female entrepreneurship. On the right-hand side, I actually broke this down to the type of female entrepreneurship, so what type of entrepreneurship women are engaging in across the European countries. There you see actually the mediocre performer countries are doing better when you consider about women businesses who are hiring other people in the next 5 years. So UK would be a very clear example of this. US would be another example of this. Whereas if you were to look at the Scandinavian countries, no, less so. The women there engage not very often in self-employment anyway. There are not many female entrepreneurs, and they also don't have businesses that will grow in the next 5 years. Netherlands, again, a very consistent case, mediocre in self-employment as well as having a moderate level of female businesses with high growth expectations. I will highlight, though, there are two issues with this, because our questions, as I said, first we are focusing much more on, the Silicon Valley type entrepreneurs. Then the second one would be trying to explain why we have very few female entrepreneurs in innovative sectors compared to men. And a third issue actually concerns that such pictures where we are trying to draw explanations from are very static, right? So this is a picture from 2011 onwards, and it doesn't say anything about how female entrepreneurship changed over time, and whether the explanations we have today, so women, for instance, having limited access to resources such as finance, are these also relevant explanations to explain female entrepreneurship in the past? So for this, we actually have to look at historical female entrepreneurship, and actually we know from the scattered historical evidence out there that studied female entrepreneurship in different case studies, you will see that actually female entrepreneurship was a very pronounced phenomenon. Women were very active, at least from early modern onwards. They were business owners, they engaged in trade, they invested in businesses. They were very active, actually. So I don't have time to take you all the way back to the early modern time as well, so that's why I will focus mostly on the 20th century. And I will start with giving an example of two exceptional female entrepreneurs. This actually is a patent application by Melissa Betts. And Melita Betts is actually the innovator of filter coffee. So next time, every time that you wake up, you can thank to her that she discovered filter coffee. And she did that in 1908, and she actually still, I mean, she doesn't live anymore, but her family members are still very rich in a German area. They have a very successful business where they are hiring another 500 employees, and it has been active the last 100 years. So that's one. Another one would be, here we have a Dutch female entrepreneur. She is actually born in 1923, and she was an owner of a transportation company, a field where we would not relate women in the first place, but a female entrepreneur, not at all. And she was actually chosen the first businesswoman of the year even. So, as you can imagine, I'm not going to make my talk based on 2 female entrepreneurs, and based on this, you should be convinced that we should look at historical female entrepreneurship. We have many of them. And in this case, I do want to share something prior to 20th century, because I think this figure is one of the reasons I entered to the field of studying historical female entrepreneurship. And this actually is a study by Zorina Khan, and she actually looks at the innovation activities of women. This figure is innovation activities of French women in the 19th century, and it actually shows that women were active patent applicants, so they were innovators. And what you see happening in the 19th century, they keep increasing, and in the 1850s you see that there are 4,000 patents that have been filed by women. And to give you a relative importance what 4,000 patent application would mean in the 19th century France, for instance, if you look at the textile industry, that will make up 16% of the all patents that was applied. So for the 19th century France, I think this is quite a remarkable number that we should not go past by. So, but let me take you to the promised field as well. So that is the trends in 20th century. As I said, we still have a lot of knowledge gap. We only based our knowledge based on different scattered historical evidence. But I try to put this all in together to give a sense of what we know about the 20th century historically and across context. So the first striking thing would be that while we assume that, female entrepreneurship is most probably a recent phenomenon, Zara was highlighting, maybe we are going for the better, there has been improving taking place. If you take the number that 1 out of 3 women are entrepreneurs, beginning of the 20th century, the numbers are not so far from it. So let's look at some of these numbers. So in UK, in the 1901, women made up 26% of the business owners. In Germany, it would be around 25%. In Belgium, it would be 34%, very close to the numbers today. And in US, it was more somewhere around 40%. So in that sense, we didn't make that much progress. If you look at the sectors that women were engaging in, so it was also good to have an indication where they were active in. They were active in service sector. So in the service sector, think like they owned, for instance, hotels, they had bed and breakfast, they were in the food sector, but they were also involved, for instance, in the UK case, in manufacturing as well, in textile industry. Again, this sectoral segregation we see for female entrepreneurs is not very different than what we have today. Another thing that is striking, if you were to take a very long-term perspective, okay, in the beginning of the 19th century, 20th century, the numbers are similar to today, but what happened in between? You see a lot of increases and reversals. So it's not a static process that progresses linearly over time, it goes up and down. So for the places where we have long-term information on, that would be for the Dutch case, UK and US, for instance. And on the picture above, I just share you how female entrepreneurship defined in this case in terms of self-employment evolved over the whole 20th century, as well as female employers. So the solid line would represent the female self-employer, share of the female employers, so they hire other people, whereas the scattered lines are just self-employed people, so they don't employ per se other people. And what comes out there, you see increase and decline, right? And I just highlighted a couple of periods that are striking. So what you see happening from 1930s until the 1950s, the share of female employers are increasing. We do see a decline taking place between 1950s and 1970s, and from 1970s onwards, female entrepreneurship starts increasing again. And this is also something not specific to the Dutch case. This increase we see is also in the case of UK, but also in the US context as well. What are the possible explanations? So why do we see this increase and decline taking place? So behind there are many historical explanations. So if you were to look at in the pre-1950 period, actually in the times of unemployment, so think of Great Depression. Are everyone in the audience familiar what Great Depression is? Yeah? Okay. So it's one of the biggest economic crises, and during this period actually entrepreneurship provided an alternative for women to be able to participate in entrepreneurship. So it's an alternative way to generate some income. Another effect we see is during the war. So men go to war, women take over their husbands' or fathers' businesses, then again we see an increase taking place. But another explanation also concerns the flexibility entrepreneurship provided. So think about the welfare arrangements that we are discussing today, and is still not very widely available. In the beginning of the 20th century, it was hardly there. So you take care of your own children. And in such a situation, actually entrepreneurship was providing an alternative to combine work with childcare. And that's also what can be one of the explanations why women were engaging in the service sector, where they could be, hairdressers, but they can also take care of their children at the same time. What you see happening after the decline between the 50s and 70s, there are a number of plausible explanations. So breadwinner economy can be one, so that men start earning a lot, so then women have to work less, and we can see a withdrawal taking place. So for female entrepreneurship, this is the case, but whether this is the case for, and to what extent for female entrepreneurship is still questionable, and we don't have enough evidence for it. And from 1970s onwards, the increase of service sector in general creates a lot of opportunities for women, and we see them entering to the entrepreneurship field again. But again, the extent of their participation depends on the availability of the childcare arrangements, which still is relatively limited, and again, that's one of the reasons that entrepreneurship provides an alternative. What we see happening after the 1970s, again, another figure, to continue the figure, but in this case I'm using a new measure, so the trend is a bit broken, so keep that in mind, that between the 1980s to 2000 it remains rather stable, and then after 2000 onwards again we see another increase taking place. Though it's also important to highlight the type of female entrepreneurship where we observe an increase, they are mostly still self-employed, and less engaged in the, this innovative business generating things. Though it is very important to highlight, there is a large variation across European countries there as well. Remember the very first picture I showed you about? While the Scandinavian countries, it remains relatively low, we see that, for instance, high growth female entrepreneurship is very high in the other contexts. So there actually, the availability of the governmental programs, the availability of credit, but also how easy to start business, as well as how less concentrated the bank structure is, makes actually much possible for females to entrepreneurs in more innovative and high growth entrepreneurship. So the context matters, as well as this context also matters not only to understand what's going on across European countries, but also over time. So what I want to actually highlight one more thing, so I hope I convinced you with the historical perspective, it actually highlights female entrepreneurship is a very dynamic concept that doesn't progress linearly over time. We need to look at other explanations. But I want to make my statement before I finish my talk with one more thing, how history can be useful to find solutions to female entrepreneurs of today. And there, for instance, we have to look at the current explanations at hand. So most of the time, it is argued that women are less entrepreneurial because, they lack the governmental arrangements to help them in the childcare. It's a cultural understanding, women do more work and entrepreneurs have to do a lot of hours, so then it doesn't work all the time. They don't have access to the finance, and they don't have the access to the male networks and so on and so forth. If you think about these constraints though, and remember my case about the patent application, this transportation woman, and then there are other examples I can keep going, and also this figure on the patent applications, these issues that I highlighted or the constraints that we identify today were much more pronounced in the beginning of the 20th century, on the 19th century. So the question is, how did they manage? Can we learn something from them? And there I will want to bring out a couple of explanations or possibilities there that we can learn. So what we see happening in that figure of the 19th century female innovators, family businesses was an important training opportunity for women. In the time of where the universities were not there, very limited, I mean they were there, but it was only for a very small scale of group. For women, this provided an important alternative. The same also holds for, instead of thinking about financial opportunities, actually in the case of Netherlands, there was a woman bank that was active until the 1970s that was providing credit options to women. So there were also some mesa-level solutions. So instead of maybe top and under-regulated solutions, we can also start thinking about other informal solutions that provide an alternative route to support female entrepreneurs. So here I want to come to an end to my talk. I think I took a bit more. So I want to finish with a quote actually, and this is from Sir William Montage, who is actually visited from London to Amsterdam in the 17th century. Again, I'm taking you far back in time. And he actually observes, it is very observable here, and he means Amsterdam, more women are found in business than men, and they manage it well. So actually, women were very active, and this was recognized. So something went somewhere wrong that we forgot about them. So the next step should be about, so as I said, we know what the current explanations are, and we know from historical case studies what could be the trends and that they were active and what could explain it. But the next step should be about to develop more systematic tools that allows us to compare how female entrepreneurship not only develop across countries but also over time, to be able to test some of the explanations that I presented you today. So these are some of my ideas, but I don't have a proof to share with you yet. So that's why I will go to NIAS to test all of this to identify the valid tools behind it. So for the moment there are more hypotheses. So, and by doing so, I think we should really have a use of the historical lens to develop new tools, because what we have now has not been working very efficiently. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Selin. That was super interesting and very, well, a very nice talk. I'll join you on the stage, and Kirsten, you're welcome to join us too. And I'm super curious about your response to Selin's talk, her presentation.
Thank you very much. I hope my mic is working. Is my mic working? Yeah?
I think it is, yes.
Thank you so much for this insightful introduction. I actually learned a lot. I'm sure a lot of us did. Twist it?
Yeah, and a bit lower.
Lower. Sorry for this.
We'll get there.
Yes? Better?
I hope so.
I hope so too. I see some hesitant faces. Yes, better? Okay, good. So thank you. I learned a lot. I'm sure a lot of us did. So maybe a short reflection. I am an entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur 10 years before I became an MP, and I recently set up my business again, as I told you before. I actually heard a lot that resonated with me. The biggest, resonation to me was, it's not just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. Right at the beginning, the 3 reasons why you thought people should listen to you, I very much agree with that. And I think sometimes, when discussing female entrepreneurship, we tend to either listen to ethical reasoning behind why we should pay attention to female entrepreneurship, feminist reasoning, inclusive reasoning, developmental, or we focus very much on the economical, the financial, you know, the business aspect of it. What I find fascinating about your approach is that it's not either or, but it's and then some. So that I find very interesting and also inspiring. I also heard some new things. I was actually surprised by the patents. I'm sure a lot of us were. 4,000 a year, that's a lot. But I also heard some things that I can very much relate to. As you mentioned, you know, I was part of a group in the House of Parliament here in the Netherlands that focused on gender equality, and we actually could pick a few topics that would be our focal topics, and we could actually commission some research, and our topic was female entrepreneurship. So we commissioned research from the Central Bureau of Statistics, and I brought it with me. I actually wrote down some key insights, and what I found interesting, for example, is that well, that number that you mentioned, hovering between the 20 and the 40, it's still the same. 37% of entrepreneurs in the Netherlands, according to this research, which is the most recent research that was gathered last year, 37%. So that's interesting. What I also found interesting is that the median income that female entrepreneurs have in the Netherlands is considerably lower than what male entrepreneurs are actually making. It's 18,500 for women and 42,000 for men. And you know, mind you, this is median, so it's not, you know, it doesn't, because of course there is the type A entrepreneurs, let's say the Chanels and the, you know, they are there and they make a whole lot more. What I also found interesting is that you also see the same differences that we see in the general Dutch population when it comes to economical independence and financial independence. And you know, just a small footnote, so economical independence, that is, let's say, the welfare level, that's 990 euros, that was the level in 2019, the numbers used for this research. So in the general population, 63.8 of Dutch women are economically independent, which means welfare level. That's not a lot, 990 euros a month. Financial independence, that's another definition, that is minimum wage, and that is 1,400, and that is 53% of Dutch women. So that's already, you know, that's just over half. If you look at entrepreneurs, it's higher than the average population, so that's interesting. So female entrepreneurs without staff, so the independent self-employed part, 58.7 are actually economically independent, 52.1 financially independent, which also shows that there is a group of entrepreneurs who actually work, well, less hours than men, as we see in the general population, and who actually also earn less than men. So this difference is very consistent. And a last bit that you also mentioned, that also, I actually asked parliamentary questions about, is the access to finance. And I think that's a very important point. From our research, it turned out that only 37% of women actually female entrepreneurs found access to financing. And for male entrepreneurs it was over half. So that is a really big difference. I asked our ministers actually, because it's not just economical affairs, it's also sometimes it's development and trade. I asked them, you know, look into this, why is it, and what can we do to fix it? I have to admit I was not totally convinced or happy with the answers we got. So I think, like you said, there's still a lot of work to be done, also when it comes to filling in the blanks, because there's just a lot we don't know. So I'm very much looking forward to following up on your research, and thank you so much for this inspiring introduction.
Thank you for your nice words.
Yes, thank you so much. I think there's a lot to discuss in the panel discussion, and I hope you're all welcome to join with questions. But before we do, I think Josephine, will you read your column? And I think then After that, Celine, you're welcome to respond to both Kirsten and Josephine, of course.
Yes. So I'm bringing it to pop culture. And I'm going to share some business advice from Kris Jenner, which may help. By bringing Kourtney, Kim, Khloe, Robert, Kendall, and Kylie closer into the world, it seems to me that Kris Jenner has done enough good deeds. But thankfully, she proves to be the gift that keeps on giving. Not only has she given birth to this amazing family that we got to know on their reality show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, she also gives amazing business advice. Her style can be characterized as blending motherly love and rock-hard business resolve, evident from her many iconic quotes circulating the internet. She tells her daughters, "You're doing amazing, sweetie," when they pose for Playboy. And if someone says no, you're talking to the wrong person. Trademarking the term momager, she fits her business philosophy into a single perfect quote, right after she learns about the leaking of Kim's sex tape. As she says, "As a mom, I wanted to kill her. But as a manager, I knew I had a job to do." Kris Jenner, while rooted in her jobs as housewife and mother, is also a CEO and has given birth to CEOs. Her youngest daughter, Kylie, was controversially named a self-made billionaire by the age of 21, raking in money from the makeup line started after she used fillers to enhance her own lips, sparking a global frenzy for larger lips, controversy for cultural appropriation, and success by smart marketing. Kim, another one of Kris Jenner's successful daughters, has risen from the ashes of her sex tape scandal and has cleverly turned focus on her body into multiple successful businesses, the latest one being her shapewear line Skims, which promises to make every woman feel confident and secure, while every body roll is denied its existence. Across channels, moving from E! Entertainment Network, where the Kardashians aired, to a network called Bravo, there exists another ensemble cast of women who have been working from home long before the pandemic hit. They are called the Real Housewives. Much like Kris Jenner's multiple roles, these Real Housewives are not just housewives and moms. They have become CEOs by turning their visibility into actual profit. They seem to have cleverly flipped the tables on expectations of women, simply by taking the very private sphere of the home, traditionally a place that restricts women, and turning it into a public space, inviting viewers to observe their home lives and lifestyles, and ultimately buy into it. In this way, one of the most limiting places for women, the home, becomes a place where power and value is generated. And this is something to be celebrated, but not without some heavy side notes. The Kardashians and the Real Housewives and the influencers that came after them, like our very own Monica Geuze or Nina Pierson, sell products, sure, but they ultimately sell themselves. Their bodies, lifestyle, and home life are the basis for their fame and the basis of their businesses. Their personal brands make them CEOs of their own life, but all of it is rooted in the feminine sphere. Right now, on the Real Housewives of Potomac, a town not far from Washington, D.C., there's a competition going on between Karen, who sells 3 wick candles, and Wendy, whose candles only have 1 wick. It's a riveting rivalry, and I implore everyone to tune in. But it's not just candles. It's shapewear lines like Skims, a line of food and beverages, promoting skinniness with its title Skinny Girl, skincare and makeup lines that promise to enhance lips and hide your veins, and lines of jeans that promises you'll look sexy in every pair. Unfortunately, what seems to have happened is that the power of these CEOs is bound to businesses that deal in women's insecurities. Every product is tied to either the home or the female body, with the focus on continued improvement. To sell products, they need to remind other women that there are enough areas in their lives that need improvement, that could do with a little concealer, shapewear, or extra decoration. While there might be some progress in our move from housewives to CEOs, this progress is still tied to restrictive and harmful expectations of women to always look perfect. It's hard to tell if this negates their power as CEOs. That might be too hard a punishment, or even an unfair one. Would we judge male CEOs the same way? And can we really blame them? Are they not just playing the hand that they were dealt? These questions are all debatable, but it does prove the complexity of progress. Sometimes power is not enough, no matter how entertaining it might be. That's it.
Thank you so much, Josephine. Thank you. That makes me wonder immediately after your response to Celine as well. Kirsten, what do you know about, in that sense, the kind of businesses that female entrepreneurs in the Netherlands today?
It's a mixed group. We know that the, let's say, traditional type B entrepreneurs are still very present. So then I'm thinking hairdressers, nail stylists, sewing salons, you know, that does exist. But what I also found a very interesting outcome of our research was that if you zoom in on the group of entrepreneurs in the Netherlands, women entrepreneurs are actually higher educated, or let's say more theoretically educated, than male entrepreneurs. So when you zoom in on male entrepreneurs, you have like bricklayers, construction workers, delivery. You might also say some of these people are not real entrepreneurs. Of course, there's a lot of interesting court cases going on where, let's say, the new platform economy is also being challenged. You know, is a delivery person an entrepreneur, or is it actually an employee guised as? But in general, I thought it was to me, a surprising outcome that on the whole, female entrepreneurs in the Netherlands have higher or more theoretical education than male entrepreneurs in the Netherlands. So yeah, I think that it's a mixed group, and that also very much relates to what you were saying about the image we have of female entrepreneurs. And that also, you said, you know, did I even consider entrepreneurship to be female? Your question you asked at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think it's important to realize that, you know, the Jenners/Kardashians are entrepreneurs. Our hairdresser, our nail stylist could be an entrepreneur. But Coco Chanel is also was an entrepreneur in her day.
Yeah, and this also makes me wonder about this image of a female entrepreneur. Why? Maybe both of you have something to say about it. Why do fewer self-employed women, I suppose, see themselves entrepreneurs? As far as I can say, I know many women who are self-employed see themselves as freelancers. Yeah. But I would say they're also entrepreneurs, but they don't, I guess they don't see themselves that way, or they don't present themselves that way. Why would you have an answer of how that comes about, Celine?
Yeah, so my impression would be whether this would be, so what you describe in terms of self-employed woman or the freelancer, let's call it, whether this is a gender-specific phenomenon. So I wonder if you also go to a man who is a freelancer, whether he would also identify him as an entrepreneur or not. So my intuition would be actually both man and woman, independent of their gender, can think that they are not entrepreneurs, and I think that might be becoming from that the cause could be related to our focus on a type of entrepreneurs that I started with, because when we think of the entrepreneur, even so, I was also involved in a Horizon 2020 project, and the whole idea was, you know, how we create an entrepreneurial society in Europe. That was the question. And our goal was go and do research and come up with nice policy tools, and we will have an entrepreneurial society in Europe. So in the first place, there was hardly any gender perspective there, so that's one thing. But the thing where we ended up in that research is that our focus has been much more on that, you know, our image has been directed to the Silicon type entrepreneurs that we have. So these are the ones that are creating apps. They are the new type of entrepreneurs since the 90s, 70s, 80s that has been becoming popular. They are the ones who hire a lot. They are the ones who innovate. They are the ones changing our lives. So they are making big breaks in the, you know, society. And it can't come from the fact that our focus has been too much directed to this type of entrepreneurs. That still remains our dominant approach.
Yeah.
And that we pay less attention to the everyday entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and maybe since I mean, you know a lot about how this is dealt upon in politics as well. How can we move away from that A-type kind of female entrepreneur?
Well, I think personally we should start familiarizing young people with entrepreneurship at a much younger age than we do now. So I think in most curricula, entrepreneurship is now really a choice, and that choice you can only make when you are conscious you want it, which I find problematic if you zoom in on, you know, curricular choices in the Netherlands. It's very, very old-fashioned or traditional, much more so than in other European countries, actually. We see that in tech, for example. Well, women in the Netherlands are lagging behind dramatically, just as boys are really lagging behind when it comes to caring curricula. And in the Netherlands, when you are in secondary education, you choose your path at a very young age, much younger than in other countries. So, you know, some people here might have that experienced, have experienced that personally. You are forced to make some pretty drastic decisions about your future at a very young age, when you often don't even know what your passion is or what you are passionate about or who you want to be, let alone if you haven't been confronted with many, you know, role models, options. You know, I can be that as well.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, the, let's say, representation of the diversity of entrepreneurs, and then I'm not just talking about gender, I'm also talking about background, about ethnicity, about, you know, interest, about class, all sorts of, you know, differences should be much more normalized at a much younger age. So that also means familiarizing kids, maybe even already in primary school, but definitely in secondary school, with the option, okay, you can also become an entrepreneur. And that is not only become a Mark Zuckerberg, but it can also mean, well, X, Y, Z.
Yeah, so starting on from an earlier age, how do you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it's also, so maybe from a historical perspective, it is also funny. In the case of Europe, for instance, if you look at the policymakers, around the 1990s, they were looking on what was going on in the US context, and they were still skeptical about, do we really want entrepreneurs? Because, you know, many of them are just choosing entrepreneurship because they cannot find a job, and the type of profit they generate is not very reliable. But we have been moving away from whether entrepreneurship is a desirable job option. This has been changing over time as well. So I think most probably if you look at the change over time now, entrepreneurship is becoming as an alternative job option and not only something that you do when you become unemployed.
Is that then something that counts for both men and women?
Yeah, I think that counts for both, that in terms of the attitude toward entrepreneurship as an entrepreneurial choice, I think that would account overall both for men and women. And I think later on really introducing in an early age, giving entrepreneurship as an option and having this entrepreneurial education, that there are certain skills, for instance, that they highlight in the entrepreneurship literature. Introducing that in an early age most probably would be a tool that can help.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I was really fascinated by the example you showed with the woman in the, what is it, the truck, but also the coffee filter. So then it's I suppose, will you also look in your research to these kinds of examples, or really look at tools?
No, exactly. So I think to look at this example, so that's why I think it's important to talk about the diversity of female entrepreneurship, because I think, so in the first place, I think the tools that we develop for male entrepreneurs are very different than we talk about female entrepreneurs. So the effect is very different in the first place, so we should be very conscious about what type of entrepreneurship we are going for and where. And I think if you look at an historical perspective, so we have now some information, these are the trends that I shared on self-employment, but if you really are interested in understanding, you know, the more A-type entrepreneurs and innovators, then you have to have a more qualitative approach and understand where they are coming from and how they manage. And I think there, so this is again a bit more a hypothetical approach that I have to go in depth, but I think there the really informal opportunities that were available to them really created the options for them to accelerate. So the woman who is in the truck driver, she's actually she's born in a family that comes from an entrepreneurial family. So she is actually learning the skills within the family on and take it to a next level of starting up her own business. The same also would hold for the 19th century, at least the research that is on the female innovators on the 19th century France also shows that the training women had access to in the businesses was crucial actually for them to be able to practice, because innovation also requires a lot of practical skills. I think Edison even said it's like 1% idea, but it's 99% anti-perspiration. So you have to try and fail. So it requires a lot of practical skills, and there I think we should really go look at alternative options, and I think the informal training would be one possibility there.
I fully agree with that, and this also makes me think of another point that I think we are not talking about enough, and that's lifelong learning.
Yeah.
Because I believe that entrepreneurship is also a very, very big opportunity for, let's say, second or third or, later life chances. And I know many examples of that. There has also been some very interesting research done on that, on the potential of entrepreneurship for women later in life. But for that, you also need to have access to information and resources. And there I see, a lot of potential for acknowledging previously acquired experience. We have a word for that in Dutch, EVC, eerder verworven competentie, priorly acquired competencies, but we often don't acknowledge them. And especially for women who maybe have done informal jobs for most of their life, have done caring, or have run informal daycare centers in their neighborhood, or have cooked for many people, you know, that is already a huge skill set that we don't always acknowledge in the way that we acknowledge, let's say, formal education, or a resume that you can actually call a boss and say, oh, so what was he like? Well, you cannot really do that with an informal resume, but we should acknowledge the experience, and that is really going to help women, and it's going to help let's say marginalized people who are not walking in a let's say in a linear way through their experience and career path. And we should take that experience just as seriously as we do the more linear, classical, academic path.
Can you say a little bit more about, I mean, that research was done when you were in Parliament.
Yeah.
What is the current status of, do politicians in Parliament think about these kinds of things as well? Is there a kind of recognition about the fact that, for example, that informal work can
Well, not enough is my honest answer.
Yeah?
Not enough. No. I think...
And why is that?
First of all, I think because a lot of people in Parliament do not have that experience themselves. And I really believe in representation. I believe in the importance of representation, and our Parliament, as actually almost every parliament. There are only 3 parliaments worldwide that have more than 50% women, and none of them are in Europe. I think it's really important that our parliaments become more, actually that we have a representative democracy, because we call it a representative democracy, but of course it is not. Not when you look at gender, not when you look at culture, not when you look at class, not when you look at educational background. So a lot of people in parliament do not have the experience of, let's say, you know, an informal resume, or do not know many people who have that experience. So that's one thing. I think a second thing is that when we're talking about issues related to gender and intersectionality, and you know, it's complicated concepts that require a certain patience to understand if you're not familiar with them. And patience in politics right now are not necessarily the most compatible. Always. I'm trying to be diplomatic.
Yeah.
And of course, let's also be very honest, there's also a backlash going on. There's a very, you know, a conservative backlash in politics. It's in the Netherlands, it's almost everywhere. And gender, as always when there's a conservative backlash, is one of the first victims. So gender equality, thinking about intersectionality, thinking about concepts of, you know, inclusion is not very popular among conservative parties, and we have quite a few.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so you know, that's there's let's say there's work to be done.
Yeah, yeah, oh definitely. Well, good stuff. Are there already any questions in the room? I see a few hands.
Eerst?
Yeah?
Oh. Thanks, and thanks, to the 4 of you. Actually, it was so interesting so far. I was wondering whether, in terms of, I guess, the historical research you're going to do, but also maybe in a more normative sense, to what extent it would be interesting to also look at social entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. Would that make women more visible, and more normatively, would that be important for the future?
Yeah, so I will give an answer many historians give in this kind of cases. So what we know from the current situation, women do engage in more social entrepreneurship type. So that's also the example why, for instance, World Economic Forum highlights that if we talk about climate change, we should focus on female entrepreneurs, because women have different leadership types. It also shows that they are much more interested, you know, in the society issues they are much more concerned with, and then in the type of businesses they set up usually address the societal challenges we address. So social entrepreneurship is definitely a very interesting aspect that we should have a look at, but then I will come to my historical answer there. So as you can imagine, studying female entrepreneurship historically is really trying to figure out the puzzle. So, you know, the different people have looked at different historical case studies. So someone studied the Dutch context and then have a very aggregate picture on how female entrepreneurship changed over time. It doesn't say anything about what type of jobs they had, how many people they hired, you know, did they have any social aspect in their jobs. So at the moment it's very aggregate, and that would be one of my aims, to really disaggregate this data by also looking at qualitative information. You know, do we also have this A type of entrepreneurs more in the past? To what extent? The thing is, with the social entrepreneurship though, I am really afraid I will enter to a case where it will be very difficult to find information on. So, I mean, I will be working with different historical sources, and I check the availability there, you know, what kind of information I can get. For instance, in terms of patents, you can actually get information, what type of patents they applied, is it the first time they are applying, what type of comments they got, and whether they could get it in the first round, and are there, for instance, other co-applicants together, so do women do it together or with other men. So this type of qualitative information you can get, but the extent of social entrepreneurship, and even like without breaking to men and women, at least to my knowledge, it would be very hard to get information on. And that would not be an aspect I can manage, I think, at least in the next 10 years of my career. That would not be my ambition, while very interesting.
Maybe that's something for next generations to follow up on, right?
Yeah, so the thing is though with history there should also be sources available. So, but I didn't went in depth a lot because I already thought there's so much information I want to learn about. So if I, very far and I came across to this, I will definitely dig into it. But for now, my intuition says it will be a very challenging information to find.
May I add just a small thing?
Of course.
One of the things I really struggled with as a member of parliament was also the availability of gender disaggregated data. So a lot of data are just, heaped together. Mm-hmm. So, okay, let's say people working in the informal sector in Uganda. But I wanted to know, how many of those working in the informal sector in Uganda are actually women. Because then I know, what happens during a pandemic. What happens during a crisis? Are their numbers increasing, decreasing? What is happening to their position? When you just have bulk data, it becomes very difficult to make policy. So you're struggling with that as a scientist, and as a policymaker and politician, a lot of people are struggling to actually make policy, gender responsive and gender sensitive.
Yeah.
I can tell you that the EWL, the European Women's Lobby, has a project. It's funded by the Chanel Foundation.
Yeah.
About social entrepreneurship, focusing on the gender pay gap and also gender budgeting.
Yep.
So maybe information.
That's good to know. I saw another question in the back of the room.
I also have a question specifically for Kirsten, but also for Sarah and for Celine, if you consider yourself entrepreneurs, which is, if you look back at your personal history as well as practical and structural factors, what were some things that really pushed you towards entrepreneur? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That pushed you to pursue that path, and what is something that really held you back?
Yeah, good question. Well, the shortest answer in my case was a concussion, because I actually had a concussion which knocked me out literally and figuratively for a few weeks, which allowed me time to think. It was right at that time that I had to renew my then contract. And I just had an epiphany, like I am not going to renew my contract. I am actually fed up of doing work for somebody else. I want to actually pursue my own vision. And that was, so it was rest. The time to actually have some distance and to think, no, this is not what I want. But that had, of course, been building for a while. But I found what was holding me back. Well, I'm going to be very honest, fear. I think the same thing that's holding a lot of people back from realizing their dreams. So fear was, for me, a big factor, and also not having anyone in my direct vicinity. So I didn't have a family of entrepreneurs around me. I mean, I come from a family of teachers. So yeah, nobody that I talked to actually said, oh yeah, good idea. No, all the people I talked to were like, oh, but how are you going to actually pay your mortgage? And what are you, oh, it's so insecure, and what are you going to... So it was actually that, resources in terms of network information, but also the little voice that I call Little Kirsten, that I think a lot of us have. Oh, are you sure you can do this? And you're probably going to suck at this, and you're probably going to fail. And I needed to find the remote control to switch that voice off, and to find people who could help me. So I found a mentor, and I found a good accountant. That's the best advice my mentor gave. Start with a good accountant. So if anybody here wants to set up a business, start with a mentor and a good accountant. And then step by step worked on solving practical issues and confidence issues. That's the honest answer.
I'm curious, because you're an actual entrepreneur with a business, but I'm not that kind of entrepreneur, but I think entrepreneurship in a sense also is, I suppose, a mindset, but maybe we're entering different territory here. But how do you think about that, Celine? Would you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
Not at all, because I wanted to come back to the risk-taking that you also mentioned, because we also focused a lot, for instance, the informal training opportunities. We should change our perception. But if you look at the psychological factors as well, why we have fewer female entrepreneurs, women are usually classified as less risk takers. So that's one of the psychological explanations that women dare less. And of course, it doesn't have to necessarily have to be that way, right? So you can also create some buffer zones that creates opportunities that in case women start a business and they fail, there's an alternative that they can rely on, that you create some kind of a safety net around this. Though the thing is, indeed, at the current stage and how, you know, the way we structure our society and the solutions that we have, indeed it requires some risk-taking as well. But yeah, and actually it was even in my definition, right? So that if you are talking about an entrepreneur, you are creating or you are producing a new idea or a new product or a new service to the market under uncertainty. So that will be the general definition. And if you were to take this, yeah, I would assume that, you know, innovators are like institutional entrepreneurs such as political leaders that are changing it, and they take the risk and they go against the mainstream idea. But if I look at my individual case, I am not a risk taker at all. I don't even drive a car because I think about all the possible risks this can involve. And I mean, I have been working in the same institution over my whole career as well. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, as an academic entrepreneur, you could identify, though, I mean, on a personal level, I might not be a risk taker, but of course, I am also coming up with new ideas and introducing to the market. So, if you think academics as entrepreneurs because they are introducing new ideas, might be entrepreneurs, but I'm not sure the risk-taking, if it's there, I would not take it there. Because otherwise then everyone ends up being an entrepreneur, and I don't think this is the case.
No.
So I would not stretch it that far.
There's also a trend to actually, you know, force academics to become entrepreneurs, and I don't agree with that either, because I think, you know, science is, you know, should be science in its own right, and should be funded, and should be, you know, so that I also wanted to say.
So
yeah, that's true.
I also think entrepreneurship should be funded too, because there are also funding opportunities in some cases for entrepreneurs too, right? With good ideas.
True.
I see a question or a remark or by someone in the room.
Thank you very much, and thank you all ladies for the very interesting discussion about entrepreneurs. And now we talk about entrepreneurs and science. I've seen that in my career. I'm a scientist. That there was a lot of pushing also from the government to have entrepreneurship, etc. But entrepreneurship and also working for big firms is only a very small part of reality, and the freedom of science is very, very important, that you can also search for non-commercial things and better things and prove things that are not commercial at all. And that is a very good thing in our society, in our democracy, that we have the time and that we give the scientists the time to search their own field. I did that myself. I created an own field 25 years ago. And I think that is very, very important, because then you can be creative and innovative. So the commercial things are not the only thing in the world.
I think you have a very strong point, and I find it quite interesting that you say that scientists should have the time to really discover their own discipline, because that aligns very much with what the fellows at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study do. So I couldn't agree more. I see that we're not running out of time yet, but I had two questions. A very short practical question to you, Celine, is whatever happened to the Dutch Women Bank? Did it just collapse?
So that is also, I mean, there are so many explanations in the trends that we see. I didn't have time, but most probably they also disappeared, because what you see happening in the 20th century, the bank structure was very concentrated at the end of the 19th century. But in the beginning of the 20th century, banks starts merging.
Yeah.
So if you look at the bank concentration in the economy today, I think the 3 Dutch banks would make up 80% of all the, availability of the funds, and they are the ones, running the whole finance sector almost. So most probably, for the Dutch female banks, as well as not specific to them, but also the other small banks, there was not many room for them to exist anymore, and that they got merged. So that could be one of the explanations behind also that there were less financing opportunities for women in the second, between the first half of the 20th century, that these banks becoming bigger, but also firms becoming bigger, might also be an explanation behind why we see a decline taking place in female entrepreneurship. Because it's less favorable.
Yeah, but because you mentioned, I think, in your talk that women or female entrepreneurs have less financial opportunities. I don't know if I say it correctly, but I was immediately thinking, what if we would have another women bank? Would that also make that there would be, for example, more female entrepreneurs or less?
So today the situation is in one of the explanations that you also shared information, right, in terms of that female-owned businesses and access to finance. Though there are the stories, of course, not only about, the supply of finance. So if you go to banks, they also have now, opportunities that are directed to entrepreneurs, and they will say, we also want to develop a gender lens so that more women come. But they say there are no women coming to apply to us.
But isn't that a little bit of a chicken-egg discussion?
Exactly. But so the thing is, so it's also the case that female entrepreneurs that can be related to the less risk-taking as well. They want to rely less on the banks at the same time, so they can also be demanding less. So there's indeed a chicken-egg story that might be going on. But then the solution could be that instead of, developing specific finance tools through big organizations, that you think about more localized solutions where women have easier access to it. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you establish a full Dutch bank that is specific to women in the 20th century. And also, to be honest, I have to be looking at, how many actually female entrepreneurs made use of the opportunity of the Dutch bank, because it was also not specific for Dutch female entrepreneurs, but it was also for women in the household that were facing, financial constraints, that they could go to the bank to rely in a situation where they didn't have finances enough that would help them survive. So there was a collective action story going on there as well. So it was not a profit-making business per se. So I don't think you should apply exactly the same model from the past to 21st century, because I think the conditions are very different, the economic sector is very different, but you could think by being inspired alternative solutions that might be in a smaller scale level.
Yeah. All right. Then I had another question, and I have to think about how to formulate it a little bit. Maybe you can both reflect on it. What makes, we're talking about female entrepreneurship here tonight, about the past and present. What makes female entrepreneurship different than other kinds of entrepreneurship?
I have a problem with that difference, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of, and most of the differences that we see between the different genders is that are actually differences that we learned. So I'm not very much a nature person, I'm very much a nurture person, and I think a lot of gender inequality is explaining the differences we see today.
Yeah.
And it's about roles we take on very early in life. Beyonce is a name that we haven't mentioned today, and I think we really need to mention Beyonce, because she is, we need to mention Beyonce, full stop.
Always.
And she did this fascinating campaign, which was the Ban Bossy campaign. And she said, I'm not bossy, I'm the boss. The word bossy is to this very day used to describe girls with a higher level of being assertive. And this word bossy is hardly ever used to describe boys. And I think in a nutshell, that says so much. So if you grow up believing that you shouldn't be bossy, and you should, you should be modest, and you should be pleasant, and you should not be aggressive, and all these things that we still, to this very day, teach girls. Mm-hmm. And that still our school books are infested with, and that still TV shows and commercials and everything is really drenched with, then the result is what we see. That is what I believe. So I think what we need to do is really invest in showing girls that they can become anything. Just one small anecdote, but you can Google it. Some of you may know this, but there's this clip that shows a primary school class in the UK, and the teacher asked them to draw, you know it, right? The surgeon and the firefighter and the pilot. And all kids draw white men. And then the teacher says, do you want to meet the actual people? And the kids are like, yeah. And then the door opens and there are 3 women, 2 of whom are women of color, and they're in their, work gear. And then the first comment from the classroom is a little girl or guy, you cannot hear it, that says, oh, but they're dressed up. And that really breaks my heart, because at this young age we already, program our kids to believe that they actually cannot be the real, professionals. So I think that's where we need to start at a very early age, because, you can't be what you can't see. That's as simple as it is.
Then that maybe I'll give the last question to Celine. It relates a little bit to what Kirsten said, but what can we learn from the past then to to female entrepreneurs or the entrepreneurs of the future?
Yeah, so I hope that it was also a bit well emphasized in the talk as well, and I can no way, go over what Kirsten says, but I think history has a lot to offer to us in terms of how we approach the female entrepreneurship. So in the first place, it makes us move away from this approach that, we are doing well in female entrepreneurship. So if you look at the comparisons that we talk in both in the policy as well as in social sciences, it will look at how we have been doing in the last 20 years, and it will say, yeah, okay, there has been some progress, maybe in some places progress has been limited, but if we do this and that and given enough time, it will go in the right direction. So in the first place, history will teach us, and that was the figures, this is not the case. No. I mean, we have not been making progress, we have been going back in time in some cases, and coming back again. So it is about highlighting that this is not a linear progress, and there has to be conscious decisions made and then policy tools being developed to be able to support female entrepreneurs. So that would take to the second side, that thinking about solutions, understanding the constraints we had today and what were the solutions in the past, given that the constraints were more pronounced, and to what extent they are applicable today, and how we can make them in a way transferable to the conditions of today, would actually be the nice way of using a historical lens while we are developing new historical solutions that considers what happened in the past to understand the situation now, but also how to support the female entrepreneurs in the future. So I think we cannot really go further by denying, what happened in the past, or taking into consideration what happened in the past. Otherwise, we will be repeating the same mistakes again and again.
Yeah, we shouldn't do that, I suppose.
No.
If there are no more questions here in the room, I think I'm going to call it a night. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Kirsten, Josephine, Celine. I'm super happy and about this evening. I'm super glad we mentioned both the Kardashians and Beyoncé in this talk, and I hope to see you all in November at our new NIAS talk. Thank you.
Thank you.